And now let's just dive in quickly to the infrastructure deal. Now, here's the latest update on where things are. You see this big chart. Don't worry about it right now. What I want to start off by framing is basically here's the current state of play with our infrastructure negotiations. The Senate announced just yesterday that they have come to an agreement. The Senate side has come to an agreement in authorizing somewhere in about $3.5 trillion in a package in about 8 to 10 years for infrastructure investment. So they are going to authorize about a $3.5 trillion package. That is what was announced yesterday on the Senate side. And then the House side, we are ready to go on something that's known as reconciliation, which I'll move later. In addition to that broader infrastructure bill, we have this bipartisan infrastructure proposal. And this bipartisan infrastructure proposal is, sorry about that. Deco's upset by the bipartisan bill. The bipartisan infrastructure proposal is much smaller and it does not meet the same needs that the overall proposal for and frankly what the Biden administration has outlined is necessary. And so that is kind of the rub, right? We have the bipartisan bill, and then we have the overall infrastructure bill where the Senate and the House have to kind of come to an agreement. Now, here's the problem with the bipartisan bill. As you can see, and if you could go back one slide, as you can see, this blue bar is what the Biden administration's proposal is on the infrastructure plan. Now, for the record, when the Biden administration released their plan, it was already too small, in my opinion, for us to meet our infrastructure needs. But no matter, the blue bar is the Biden American Jobs Plan. That is his infrastructure outline, right? And as you can see, the kind of pinkish salmon color bars are the bipartisan infrastructure deal. Now, this is not all of the spending. This is just some of the categories where you see the bipartisan infrastructure deal does meet some of the full requests, but also falls very far short in things like electric vehicles, for example. And what's really important when I talk about why the Biden administration's infrastructure plan was already too small, an example here is in passenger and freight rail. A lot of those investments are on kind of sprucing up Amtrak and sprucing up rail that already exists that has been underinvested. But the Biden administration and in these numbers are not allocations for things like new high-speed rail, which is what an infrastructure bill should actually really truly contain. And that's one of the things that we're pushing on the House side, right? Because one of the beauties in our system of checks and balances is that everybody has their contribution. And so the Biden proposal is nice. There are going to be places where we push and have been able to push the Biden administration, where we're going to actually get things and fund things that the Biden administration did not have in their proposal. There are going to be areas where, as you can see with this bipartisan deal, where it may get less investment than necessary. And so one of the things that we want to make very clear is that we are not letting go of certain key areas, which is not on this graph, of care infrastructure. Things like childcare, things like healthcare, and things like, frankly, just an enormous amount of the social service infrastructure sector. And so we can go to our next slide now. And so one of the priorities, as I mentioned, excluded from the bipartisan deal is that the bipartisan deal has nothing on housing. It has nothing on long-term care. It has nothing on tax credits like clean and renewable energy, if you own a home or have a building or a vehicle, we used to have very aggressive tax credits for you to get an electric car or install solar panels. And even now, hoping to expand not just for car infrastructure, but for things like other forms of electric transport. Which those tax credits are very critical because they help people afford transitioning their transportation, transitioning their home to clean and renewable energy. And lastly, the bipartisan deal has nothing in research and development and manufacturing of new clean tech. Funding in this bipartisan deal, it includes some things that were not in the Biden proposal, a financing authority and Superfund remediation, but they're pretty modest. So what does that mean for us, right? This doesn't look super rosy. So what does that mean that we're going to do? So we can go to our next slide. What this means is that we've got the bipartisan deal, which is way too small. And by the way, we do not need a bipartisan deal in order to pass this bill. I think it's great that Republicans are, wanting to join some Democrats. That's wonderful, but this country and people across the country elected Democratic majorities. They elected a Democratic president, they elected a Democratic House majority, and they elected a Democratic Senate. And so what that means is that Republicans are not in charge of dictating what policies we pass and what policies we don't pass. And the idea that we would be limited by a bipartisan deal is laughable. It is laughable. And I think especially as time has gone on, we've also seen that the fossil fuel industry has been revealed to be playing a very critical role in trying to push this bipartisan deal. There was ExxonMobil lobbyists that were kind of caught on tape admitting that they have been essentially having Democratic and Republican senators essentially on speed dial and talking to them weekly as they try to contour the shapes of the bipartisan deal. And we are starting to see some of that echoed in public statements. You have ExxonMobil saying, we have someone like Joe Manchin on speed dial, and we talk to him every week. And ExxonMobil lobbyists are huddling with, they named 11 senators, Democratic and Republican, that they huddle with. And then we're now like a week or two later, hearing some of those same folks saying, we need to protect the fossil fuel industry. They're very deeply concerned with the investments that we're making in clean energy and helping people transition their energy needs. I mean, this is ridiculous. This is straight up the kind of legal corruption and money in politics that is really eroding our ability to save our planet, give ourselves health care, establish a public healthcare system, and really invest in our infrastructure. And so that is just one of many reasons why we will not only accept a bipartisan bill and investment alone. We are going to say, great, if there are some Republicans who are willing to sign onto and want to invest in things like rail infrastructure and roads and bridges, fine, that's great. We can break off those pieces that Republicans are going to agree with, and we can figure out what we can pass on a bipartisan basis. But there are also investments that we need that are not included in the bipartisan deal, as I've mentioned earlier. And we cannot allow that bipartisan deal to stop critical investments that we need to pass and invest right now. And so how we're going to do this other thing, how we're going to pass the big infrastructure bill, is a process known as reconciliation. Now, what does this mean? Reconciliation is one of the only ways that the Senate can actually pass legislation in the modern era due to the filibuster. And so because the filibuster has essentially created a 60 vote requirement in the Senate to pass any sort of meaningful legislation, the only way that you can pass anything, the only way you can pass almost anything else is through a process known as reconciliation. Budget reconciliation can be passed with 51 votes. That is how, for example, that big Republican tax scam that got passed in 2017, where we had all those changes in SALT, and you had all of these other sorts of changes in charitable giving, et cetera. That was passed with 51 Republican votes, or rather with not with 51 Republican votes, but it was passed. It bypassed a filibuster requiring less than 60 votes because Republicans used reconciliation. And so Republicans, they use reconciliation to cut taxes on the wealthy, to give themselves tax cuts on their yachts and private jets and Wall Street loopholes and whatnot. And what Democrats are going to use reconciliation for is infrastructure investment that's going to expand childcare, and that's going to expand Medicare, that's going to create a civilian climate corps, which was our central provision, which I'm really excited about and we can dive into. But we're going to use our opportunity at reconciliation, because you can't just pass anything through reconciliation. It has to be budget related, so it needs to be government spending related. And you can only use reconciliation twice a year. So those stimulus checks that you got and the child tax credit that we're getting, that's starting to hit your bank accounts now, that was all in, and the FEMA funeral assistance program, that was all in the American Rescue Plan that we passed earlier this year. That was also a reconciliation bill. So we get about 2 shots to work to pass a reconciliation bill per year. So our first shot was the American Rescue Plan with the stimulus checks and pandemic assistance, funding for schools and hospitals, et cetera. And now our second reconciliation bill for this year is going to be this infrastructure bill. So our reconciliation, these are the rules that allows the 51 vote majority. And so what are we going to include in our larger infrastructure reconciliation bill? Universal pre-K across the country for 3 and 4-year-olds. So a little bit of what we had created here in New York City with universal 3K and how that was like slowly rolled out, we're going to try to make that national right here in this reconciliation bill. I'm really, really, really excited about it. The next is childcare subsidies, because as we know, childcare is as much or sometimes more than rent, and it is obscene. It's so funny. There's like all of these stories about how there's about how there's a labor shortage and how there aren't enough people to fill jobs. Well, it's because childcare is so expensive that putting your kid and paying for your kid's childcare for you to turn around and make an hourly wage it's more expensive for you to go to work and put your kid in childcare than it is for you to stay home and take care of your child. And so, if we want people to have choice in their life and to have the ability to make the decisions that they want to make, we need to make sure that childcare is started to be treated as a right in the United States. And childcare subsidies is one of the key steps that we are making to hopefully be able to one day pave the path and to make sure we start paving the path to universal childcare in the United States. But we're not there yet, so we're starting at childcare subsidies. We've got paid family and medical leave, which is key, it's crucial. Expanded investment in truly affordable housing, expanding Medicare. So this reconciliation bill will expand Medicare so that it can cover dental, vision, and hearing for our seniors. No need to buy any of these crazy, additional plans or pay out of pocket or any of that. We're going to expand Medicare so that your hearing devices, glasses, dental care will be covered. We're also going to increase the maximum Pell Grant to help with the cost of college. And we're going to implement the Clean Green Energy Standard to ensure clean energy by 2030. A Green New Deal, which is a Green New Deal PEG year. We are also, speaking of the Green New Deal, we are also going to, it looks like we have secured a key provision in the Green New Deal in this infrastructure plan, which is the Civilian Climate Corps. I'm so excited about this. For those of you who may not know, during the Great Depression, or in the aftermath of the Great Depression and the New Deal era, Franklin Delano Roosevelt created the Civilian Conservation Corps. And if you have visited a national park in your life or a state park, many of the trails that you see were built in that 1938 to 1941, 42 Conservation Corps era program by those who enlisted in the Civilian Conservation Corps. Now, what we've decided to do, and a big part of our G&D proposals, was a restoration of this Roosevelt era program, but expanded to tackle the climate crisis. Now, the reason this is really important was because when FDR did this, the United States, after FDR launched the Civilian Conservation Corps, the US then had, as a result of the Corps, one of the best wildfire control records in its history at that time, or by that time. And so the Civilian Climate Corps recognizes the incredibly large need for environmental work in our country to protect our communities, invest in our communities, and beautify our communities as we prepare for the ravages of climate change. And so the Civilian Climate Corps funding, it will dramatically expand the AmeriCorps fund. It will dramatically expand the AmeriCorps program in the United States. We're starting to get some numbers. So I don't want to say if we're going to be doubling, tripling, increasing by 50, 75%. Once we kind of solidify that number, I'll let you know. But it's a really exciting investment. It is the first time that the Corps will be really brought back since it's the first time it'll be really created since 1938. And it's extraordinarily exciting. We've also got EV incentives, immigration reform. We are including a path to citizenship for millions of people in this reconciliation bill. And so we're hoping that this survives the parliamentarian, as well as extending the child tax credit that we've got today. So that is the reconciliation bill. And then we can go to our next slide. So how do we get it done, right? You've got the bipartisan piece, we have the reconciliation piece. This is what we're doing. House progressives are standing up. House progressives, I just want to let y'all know where this is coming from. We only have a 4-vote margin in the House. And so myself, as well as other progressive members in the House, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, Ayanna Pressley, Rashida Tlaib, et cetera, as well as many other members of our Progressive Caucus, Barbara Lee, we have made the stand and we said, we will tank the bipartisan infrastructure bill unless we also pass the reconciliation bill. And so it goes both ways, right? If Manchin and in the Senate, if they approve our reconciliation bill, we will approve their bipartisan bill. And if they try to strip immigration reform, if they try to claw back on childcare, climate action, et cetera, then we're at an impasse. It's a no-go. And so because both of these parties really want to pass their own legislation, We do find so far that the strategy has been enormously successful. When this bipartisan plan was coming together, it was trying to be used as a mechanism to tank our reconciliation bill. And so what we've said is your bipartisan bill is not going to go anywhere because we've got the House margin. And so that's created the path for us to be able to pass both. And that's our update on infrastructure. And so lastly, I'm really, really excited for our next guest. We have to talk about the 2021 child tax credit. Y'all, if you haven't checked your bank account today, if you have a kid under the age of 18, and you got direct deposit for your stimulus check, you might want to check your bank account today because there will likely be several $100s in it that was not there yesterday. And so we've got Susan Gaines here with us from the IRS to kind of talk through the child tax credit and how you can access it if it hasn't hit your account yet as well.